I had this realization when I was living in New York in my 20s where, I would just be doing what I thought was appropriate in those early days of being an assistant editor or just working in these production companies. And people would just be full of praise. Emma, you're so hardworking. You're so responsible. You're always thinking about our team. You're never late. You're always on time. And I was just like, I'm just Japanese.
You are listening to Talk Doc to Me, a podcast and community dedicated to helping documentary filmmakers thrive. I'm your host and fellow filmmaker, Leah DeLeon, and today's guest is Ema Ryan Yamazaki. Ema is a Japanese-British documentary filmmaker who got her start as an editor. Her first feature was Monkey Business, The Adventures of Curious George's Creators, and now she has just been nominated for the 97th Academy Awards for her short documentary, Instruments of a Beating Heart, released in partnership with the New York Times. Today, we are discussing Ema's career path, tips for directing and editing verite films, and a discussion behind her Oscar-nominated film, Instruments of a Beating Heart. Ema, welcome to the podcast. It is so amazing to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so I want to start with your background. So as a Japanese-British person growing up, what does that mean to you, and how do you feel like that influences your storytelling?
Yeah, so I grew up in Osaka, Japan, with a British father and a Japanese mom, and pretty much until I was 19, I lived in Japan, although I did spend some summers in the UK. But in Japan at the time, I really thought that I might be the only person like myself, meaning, there was no other friends I had with brown hair. Everybody had black hair, and, just having a parent that wasn't Japanese just wasn't as common, especially in my area. And I really thought that being able to speak English was like a negative trait. This is how much I was my world was so different, especially when I was little. So I kind of started by like wanting to fit in and all this, but eventually I think, and it took many years to kind of see Japan and my identity the way I do now, right? Kind of in a more positive way, a way that works for myself instead of kind of being annoyed at things I can't change of how things are perceived. But I do think that, inherently I kind of grew up navigating cultures. I went to Japanese public school, but then switched to an international, American style school in Japan, but also living in Japan, kind of daily going back and forth between a very international world and a Japanese world. And that kind of continues on. And I think that's really reflected in my storytelling. I have especially with Japan, like an insider, outsider perspective that I think one day I realize I should use. This is maybe something I can more uniquely do in my lifetime, to tell stories that way than trying to tell stories that other people could also do well. That's always kind of my criteria, to find stories or projects that maybe not only I can do, but definitely things that I can do well compared to other things. So I think my upbringing and my identity kind of search at a younger age really is a core part, actually, of who I am today as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like the insider-outsider perspective. Can you expand on that, and maybe that moment where you thought, like this is a unique perspective, and like I have a skill here, like I have a way to maybe bridge the gap?
Yeah, so because after I grew up in Japan, I actually moved to New York. I went to NYU and basically spent a decade in New York. And this was a time where, I didn't even, I now call myself Ema Ryan Yamazaki, combining both of my parents' family names. But I moved as Ema Ryan. I was really like not trying to hide my Japanese side, but really, I think looking back, left Japan being like, I don't really fit in here. Maybe I'll never come back. Just trying to start afresh. And I really, I think, immersed myself in how to learn how to make films. And then I realized I meant documentary film. And I started as an assistant editor, just in the midst of, being part of this like a very U.S.-centric documentary production at a moment of super exciting times. 15 years ago, I would say, when documentary was expanding. But I was really involved in these American subjects. I was Ken Burns and his partner Lynn Novick's intern for like the Vietnam project, for example, or I became an editor on projects on like CNN and HBO that was very much about like an American perspective, and I was always playing catch up. I could only kind of bring like a fresh eyes perspective because I didn't like inherently growing up learning those things in that way. And I thought, oh gosh, like the maybe one day like I want to tell stories that I feel like are prominent to me, like things that come from my life experience or my point of view. And that's when I realized, and oh, it has to be about Japan. That's what I know. And over the years leaving Japan, I also started to see Japan in a very different way, and things I took for granted growing up, like our trains run on time and there's no rats in the subway and and
Yeah,
this
very different than New York.
yeah, like consideration for others, like things I took for granted that New York is great, but in a very different way. And I think that just and also getting older and kind of like seeing the world in a different way. And I just realized, gosh, yeah, maybe I just got more interested in like on the nuances of Japan. And I think to add one more thing, when I was living abroad in New York, a lot of stories that I heard about Japan were really specific. It was about our sushi or ramen noodles. It was about people were really interested in like our ninja and samurai culture, which is about our past. And then also anime has been consistently popular. But I just there's other things, and I think like I realize if you truly want to understand Japan a bit better, how it is, there's this other things I thought of, and that was really the reason I moved back to Tokyo to try to, figure out how to tell those stories.
And with all the different types of stories that I think a lot of people call themselves a storyteller, whether they're a painter or a, traditional writer or journalist, like why did you decide that documentary film is the medium that you wanted to tell stories?
Yeah, great question. I feel like I have analyzed myself about this. When I was a child, like 5, 6 years old, I just could not stop talking about my day to my parents in like the most dramatic, interesting way. Be like, hey, like listen to what happened, and I would. And I think that was storytelling, right? Like this, how just like in a dramatic way. And then actually, spent most of my teenage years, like my passion was dance. I was a dancer, a modern ballet dancer, and I would choreograph my own dances. And I feel like that was also my means of expression, maybe storytelling. And then I basically eventually, I think, transitioned to using, camera and audio, like visuals and audio for the same storytelling passion. And I'm not good with, I'm not particularly confident with words. I never saw myself as a writer or like, it actually still makes me nervous every time I have to, a lot of writing. It does come with documentary filmmaking, but it's really
Yeah.
not something that comes naturally to me. And I think in that also, and I also don't have like a crazy imagination. I've never thought of something in my own head that I'm like, oh, that's worth spending however much money and time to use actors and, to the fiction side. I'm always curious about things that already exist in the world and maybe how my perspective using myself as a filter can help explain things or at least provide an insight. And I think that's perfectly what documentary filmmaking can do, and that's why I'm obsessed with it.
I think you're so right. I have the same philosophy about like why are we gonna make up any stories, like spend so much money like building all these crazy sets? Like I mean, I'm obviously a documentary nerd, so I am of this mindset, but to your point of like why make any of this up when like literally in our schools already, in our neighborhoods, in just around us, around the world, like there's so many stories that are just incredible. So I totally relate to that.
Yeah. It's and I think that's why here in Japan, like documentary filmmaking is like a little bit behind in certain ways, and it's often like known as like a very objective or informational medium still. And I'm just also trying to be like I'm anything. I mean, anything but that. It's still like narrative fiction films in terms of it's a director's point of view, and I think that's like important to kind of keep saying, especially where I live right now. Yeah.
Do you feel like when early in your career, did you feel like you had support from family and friends about embarking on a career in documentary film?
My parents were really supportive in terms of like supporting my whatever my passion, right? And actually decided quite early on at age 14 that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And so I think, both my parents are teachers. Very different world from them. All my interests, like, filmmaking or even sports, was like my alien to my parents initially. But I think in terms of, I never doubted that, like, oh, like, I'm just supposed to find something I love to do and go for it. I think that's very much thanks to my parents being that way. And also, like, I learned what it means to work hard for my parents. I think those kind of things. I think consistently to this day, a lot of sometimes my family, but also my friends, like, it's so different from what a lot of people are doing in their lives, which makes it sometimes
Yeah.
cool. But I like the nitty gritty, like, sometimes the relatability. It's I sometimes struggle with that. Or just like living in Japan now, I have a 2-year-old hanging out with these other moms and in Japan, and they have no idea. Like, the Oscar news is like
Yeah.
now, like, I mean, they've heard of the Oscars, but nothing else, and so it's that,
Yeah.
but so in a way, but that's also nice because I think, like, they, in a way, like, I think you can't separate out who you are as a person to, like, as a filmmaker, especially in documentary. And I think, like, having like just a good group of friends that do different things, and they're supportive. Like, of course, like, even if they don't fully understand, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. Yeah.
It's good to have some filmmaking friends, but to your point, I also have a recent group of friends where like no one understands what I do at all. Even my family sometimes like I don't really understand your job, but it's fine. But it's good to have like both friends that can understand your pains and joys, but also some friends that are just like you go girl with like no
Yeah.
explanation.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Awesome. And then I know that you work alongside your husband a lot as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you both influence each other's creative process?
Yeah, of course. So Eric Nyari is my husband, and on a lot of my projects, he's the producer. I think, you know, he- as I mentioned, I grew up in Japan and moved to New York, and basically for my 20s. Eric basically did the opposite. He's a New Yorker, but ended up in Japan at 21, and before we knew each other, spent, over a decade separate from me in Japan, and is fluent in the language. And I think first we just I really thought that living in the US, I was going to have to choose a life. I was going to either kind of stay in the US, kind of continue on this path, kind of being in the heart of storytelling. I feel like the center of the storytelling capital of New York, or, like, I don't know, go back to Japan and totally separate that out and, in a way, start from scratch in terms of my career and figure it out. And I think I realized, oh, like, here's this guy who's kind of doing the same thing, but in both places. And I don't have to choose. We can do it both. And we kind of had the same outlook of, like, the insider outsider perspective. And our skill set's so different, like Eric's like a big picture guy who is really good at bringing people together and having great ideas in terms of where to get, a great producer, like funding and support and how to get the projects out there. And I'm kind of like buttoned down and also like, like I'm the people facing in terms of my documentary subjects and like, like just editor and just kind of like that side. So our skills don't really overlap, even though our kind of values do in terms of Japan and storytelling. So I think that's what makes the collaboration work. It is, it's a 24/7 situation when you're working with your husband. I know there's like quite a few like doc couples out there,
I
but
was just
it's
gonna say I work with my husband as well, so I'm very familiar.
yeah, yeah. So that's like, it makes life that much more adventurous, I would say, and now we have, as I
Yeah.
mentioned, like a 2-year-old and trying to, bring him into the mix. So, but yeah, that's kind of how I think our collaboration works.
Nice. And considering that you have a 2-year-old, what was it like when you were pregnant and like figuring out motherhood as a documentary filmmaker? Like
Yeah,
what was that like?
yeah, I mean, and I'm sure in a little bit we'll talk about my short Instruments of a Beating Heart. I was pregnant during that, so I was actually pretty pregnant during that shoot, and I gave birth within a few weeks later, and so in a way, like, and so I always wanted a child around that time, and it just happened very quickly. So we just got the shoot done. It was kind of like you never know, and it happened, and it's interesting, Japan has great, I know we're known for like our low birth rate and it's really a crisis. But maybe because of that, there's just like all this support actually if you know what to do and seek it. Like meaning like our nursery school childcare is very, very affordable for many, many long hours if needed and things like that. So we knew that going in. We knew we were going to it was going to take a village to raise our child, and just needing, also it's not a 9 to 5 job we have, so just like knowing that like I also like having gone through it now for 2 years, especially initially, there was also like I'm sure people can relate like a lot of guilt because especially in Japan, like even though the support is available, like there's a very strong like kind of societal pressure that the mother should be taking care of it. And even though there's these government programs, people are not using them and I was just using them, but even just that, just feeling like, oh, I should have maybe even say things like that. But I think and even this past few months, really traveling the world to get our films seen and known, it's always a balance, right? And I'm just trying to go with this, telling myself it's really quality time over quantity sometimes, and just really like being there when I can and planning these fun things every day with our son. That's kind of, but it's definitely something I haven't figured out, and I haven't really done a big shoot yet with a child. It's all kind of like editing and output right now. So as I think about my next projects, it's like and it just makes like I think your job more like it really should be worthwhile. Like I'm really gonna pick my next projects, and ideally because I know it's gonna come at a bigger sacrifice than before, and I think that's what I'm conscious of these days.
Wow, I'm just imagining you like pregnant on that set and how it was just being like very pregnant. I'm sure you have some
Well,
funny stories. Do you have any funny stories?
the kids were like, "Emma, you're getting fat. Like, what's going on?" Because because and then once they understood or I explained, they really wanted to name the child, like all sorts of candidates. I was looking at open call just for fun. Like they could like provide suggestions and why I wanted that name and things like that. It was just another great communication tool. And I also think again in Japan after a certain month, it's really the norm that you just stay home. Like you just don't see super pregnant people out and about. And I think I just was keep being like for the kids, like maybe they'll remember one day, like, you can still be pregnant and, if you're well, if you're healthy, like do
Yeah.
things, especially for the girls. That's kind of like, maybe it'll take 20 years for that insight, but that was kind of like what I was thinking. But it was like a fun, thankfully, it added more fatigue and everything, but I had a very easy pregnancy. So it was just, I'm very fortunate that I could just keep doing it. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, I want to transition a little bit into maybe some milestones of your career that you felt like, were important looking back. What do you think was like the first time where you felt like, okay, I'm like, I've kind of broke through the initial, from like, I didn't really know what I was doing to like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional.
Gosh, I feel like, there's like a few. I'm just trying to pick
Yeah.
one. I guess maybe if I can talk about two, I'll pick one editor one and then later
Yeah.
like a director one because I did start as an editor and this was I went to NYU and in my sophomore year I was fortunate enough to take a class by Sam Pollard, who is great editor, great director, just a documentary mogul. And that was the first time I realized, oh, because I was also on a student visa, I knew I had to like find a proper job after school. I was gonna have to leave the US. And how do I make it as a filmmaker? It's so vague. And Sam really, I think, not only taught me like the creativity of editing and what it can do for especially documentary, but this idea that like, oh, I should just like gain this skill, this like tangible skill that I could, be useful with initially out of school, and then also learn how to make films from other directors as their editor or as their editing team. And so that was like, and then basically after school, that's what I did. I became Sam's assistant, and then kind of quite quickly was given chances to like edit, not just for Sam, but eventually for a guy called Marc Levin, who is like a verite king in my view. His projects to film thousands of hours, and I got to join those projects. And I think there was an HBO film I edited for Marc Levin called Class Divide that, looking back, is also about education and school, and again, like kind of a those unfolding parts. It was also there was some interviews, but just like being the editor on that, like Mark giving me like, okay, you're editing it, and then really feeling like I was able to contribute. And I was still pretty young. I think I must have not been older than 25. That I think gave me the confidence, and just I was learning so much through just watching footage, and just not just the editing parts of it, but like through the footage, like imagining what it was like to direct. And I think that was about the time I realized like this is great. Maybe I should, two paths, right? Like I could keep editing, and maybe I have whatever the background and the skill set and the insight to kind of become this kind of super special doc editor for this generation. That was like an attractive goal. But also, like I said earlier, I was like, but maybe I want to try to tell stories that really matters for me as a beginning, because as an editor, you don't get to usually pick the subject matter. So that was definitely, but I really gained confidence as a storyteller, I would say, first as editing, just those initial years when all I did was edit. Yeah.
I feel like, in looking back, I went to film school, and I remember my professor telling me, like, it was a rule that you had to direct and edit, your thesis. And she was like, Leah, you should really become an editor. Like, I think you have a knack for it. And I was just like, no, I don't want to edit. Like, I don't want to be behind a computer. Like, nah, like I'm good. And, that was like 6 years ago, and I still am not really, I mean, I can edit, but I really don't consider myself an editor. But I do think, to your point, starting out, if your long-term goal is to be a director, I think starting out as an editor is so smart, because I think there's a lot of directors out there that just start calling them a director in the beginning, and then they actually don't know how to direct the editor, properly. So can you talk about maybe some tips, again, like for emerging filmmakers that maybe have the dream of being the documentary director? What can they learn about directing through editing?
Yeah, I feel like a lot, and I think maybe I'm sure like the doc DPs will say something similar going through shooting or other parts of other roles too. But I think you really have to figure out how to tell the most compelling story out of the footage that you got. Like not the footage you wish you had, or the story that how do you tell the story that you or the director, if you're the editor, like set out to tell, but through the materials that are actually available. And also, sometimes, if we need additional things, I think, I started when I was editing, I started also getting like little like co-producer or producerial credits, because you make suggestions, and then it's like, oh, they go shoot that. And then it's more than editing, you actually influence the production. And I think that was like my way into like, oh, like the editor can also, it's not just stuck with the materials. If you're still shooting, you're like, oh, this was super be helpful for this, or like, but it's all in the world of the eventual film footage and imagining the audience, that what the audience needs almost, when I feel like the director should be and often is focused on what they want initially, which is how a project is born. But I think like having that perspective to think of like how it needs to be delivered or told becomes crucial, I think, in like that difference between like a good doc and a great doc, right? Like it's like if you can have great access, a great subject matter, interesting characters, but how the project is put together is so it can make that difference, and I think starting that way, then for myself, kind of like gaining my own voice later, meaning like, oh, this is what I want as a director, but having that craft and that like toolbox, that creative toolbox to think outside of the box, or like knowing there's many ways to tell the same stories, and which is the best, like being trained in that, I think is super useful, and I think now as a director, I often don't know what I'm seeking now. I'm realizing is, again, like, and I edited, actually, I don't know if you knew this thing, but Black Box Diaries, which was also nominated for an Oscar in the feature category, and I kind of went back for the first time in a while to edit for someone else through that project recently. And that's really fun, because as a director, like you have, you're at the top in a way, and you stop kind of learning as well from others. You do learn from your crew, but like as an editor, I'm like kind of always kind of taking things from everybody else, and I did so so much of that early on, and I'm realizing like I want to continue to also edit for others just so I can become a better director too, you know. So that I think it's that crucial to whether it's editing or some other aspect of doc filmmaking. I think to have, and it can't hurt, you know. Like it's being able to do and just find I can't shoot, I can't do other parts of doc making, so but I think if having one has really given me also like a kind of so far sustainable career as well as, you know, contributing to my kind of self as a director.
Okay, so for those that have not seen the documentary, can you describe what the story is about?
Sure. It's Instruments of a Beating Heart is follows a first grade class in a Japanese public elementary school as they prepare for this big musical performance. And in that, you basically see the ups and downs of, especially this main character girl, Ayame, little Ayame. But it really is supposed to represent kind of a slice of what it means to go through a Japanese education system, kind of the collectiveness of it, and yeah, and it kind of culminates in a musical performance of Ode to Joy.
Would you say that your work often deals with like complex human subjects?
Yeah.
How do you feel like how do you as a director, and we'll take Instruments of a Beating Heart as an example. How did you establish that relationship with Ayame, and I guess how did you choose her as the character?
Yeah, you know, I do really feel like kind of like if I was to describe myself as a filmmaker, like what I do, maybe, you know, right now I'm very much like a Japan phase, but that's not necessarily like if that's just what happened, you know, where I am in terms of like the approach. I really think it's like humanizing humans, right? Like, and I think that's kind of and kind of like empathetically kind of like being there for like their struggles, their triumphs, you know, trying to share that. And then those individuals ideally for me represent more than just themselves. Like it is a personal story, but it represents something bigger. Like in terms of Instruments of a Beating Heart, it's I'm not trying to show necessarily like other people can see it that way if they want like a story of one girl. I was that girl. Like there's millions of people in Japan that go through that system, which is why Japan is the way it is, and that's why I picked a Japanese public elementary school. Actually, I spent about a decade with this subject matter trying to get the right access to a school, which took like 5 of those years, and then COVID got in the way, and then just like being there, and then, you know, spending many months after to figure out the right parts of the footage I got to tell this story. So I am a, you know, I mean, I was in this school for a whole school year. I was filming with many kids and many teachers too, right? I mean, kids are kids in a way as long as you have their parents' support and the kid likes you and is comfortable with you in a way you could film quite freely. Sometimes it's the adults, right, with the teachers, but that also took time and just to have that trust and rapport, and where there were so many days that like it was rare for us to not be there that school year, and that creates a situation where both teachers and kids just can't sustainably be different. Like that was our goal, you know, and of course the Ayame and the teachers and the other kids in the film, the people that felt natural, I think eventually with that we weren't like forcing anything, and we kind of stayed away from kids that felt more comfortable or, you know, just behaved differently if we were there. So and then Ayame was just a star, you know. She was so you know, and again, Star not being like the best pupil, like she was kind of, but always just stood out, and just so personal. Was always wanted to like give me a hug, you know, like that kind of a student, and but also just had this kind of like it was shy, but also had a passion. I felt like for life, and but just couldn't be with the group. You know, she was always like a little bit late to things, and I just had, you know, very supportive parents for the project, and so throughout the school year, it was not just her, but there were just kids who were like, if something starts to unfold with this person, like let's go, you know, and it just started happening, you know, and it was again month 11, 10, 11, 12 of a 12-month period we were in this school. This short pretty much came about. So it's you know, once and it started happening, and you know, it's always like when someone you've gotten to know so well is having a hard time, like, you know, as you know at the beginning of the film, she doesn't get doesn't get a part of this audition. And I think like in between those shots and those scenes is like me not filming with her, being like making sure she's not embarrassed, like just to tell her like we're here for her, like let's encouraging her to try another instrument, like just kind of like making sure like she's always okay, like it's not like an additional burden that we're there, and kind of like the in between conversations that I think eventually, we were like her cheerleader, and that I think led to like yeah, like be like this short, yeah.
And going back to like the original idea of this documentary, how did it transform from, from the very beginning conversations to the end product? Was it kind of similar to your original vision, or how did it adapt over time?
I wanted to get into a Japanese public elementary school with this thesis that, and again, I went to one of these schools, but I feel like 5 or 6 year olds around the world are pretty much like kids, where like in wherever, US, Japan. But by the time you're about 12, which is when elementary school ends in Japan, there's this like a Japanese 12-year-old that's very distinct from other 12-year-olds I meet around the world. It's like, and they're not to say they're all the same, but similar, have these similar kind of traits in them. Same with myself. And I had this realization when I was living in New York in my 20s, where, I would just be doing what I thought was appropriate in those early days of being an assistant editor or just working in these production companies. And people would just be full of praise. Emma, you're so hardworking. You're so responsible. You're always thinking about our team. You're never late. You're always on time. And I was just like, I'm just Japanese, this is no like, but I felt like I was benefiting from this, and I really got to think about, why am I this way? Like, what made me this? And I really attributed it back to those 6 years of early education, where that was my norm, and everything is being based off of that. And some people rebel against it, that's fine, but it's like that base, I think, like around until you're 10 is kind of what your common sense per se is built. And for me, I realized that became my strength, especially leaving and going abroad. And that was the initiation of wanting to explore the elementary school and sharing it with the world. And also in Japan, Japanese people think not very highly of our education system. And it's true, there's also many issues, but just providing like a one step back perspective that, some of these values, the fact that schools are expected to teach kids how to be, not just academics, and it's not just the math and the science and the language. It's part of the curriculum. These music performances, part of the curriculum to do these events that are supposedly provide kids an opportunity to grow and overcome a challenge, with their peers. This is like part of the curriculum. It's not like extracurricular. So this was something I just continued to think is again, not a perfect system, and I'm not saying this is the only way, but it's so different from the rest of the world that I was determined to share in an attractive form that I think the short became eventually. Just to throw it out there, and providing some hints for maybe the humanity, in the 21st century, as we realize, especially post COVID, that it's not okay just for one person, for you to be okay. Like, everybody needs to be okay, your community to live, to thrive. So yeah, this is what my and I think the short eventually, that is that singular story that captured that I was looking for in that school year.
What was the moment that you realized that you would focus in on her story specifically? Like when you start filming Verite, I'm sure you're just like filming and filming and filming and filming, and then you said over the course of a year you were filming. At what point did you maybe have the first idea of following her story specifically?
It was when she just didn't get that first audition, and well, the same day though, she decided to audition the next day for another instrument, and I just was like, and it was not just her, there were other people crying that they didn't get that part, and then it just continues. So even though I really, you will see Ema's journey, you see a little bit of the other kids in the short, but eventually my concept became like the tears of audition. It was like my initial idea with that story was that it was actually an ensemble cast, because there was so people crying everywhere that day, and I was just like, this is so special. It's like the culmination of the school year, and I love that the performance was for the incoming first graders, right? Like the first graders are going to become second graders, and again, it's like a fundamental value in Japanese education to kind of grow kids that feel like they are valued by being useful to others, like that, like your happiness is kind of like tied with being useful, which is a double-edged sword as you get older, because if you just want to please or something, but as a young person, like I think that's a good place to start personally. And that whole concept and the fact that it was going to be Ode to Joy, this wonderful music track that also didn't have any copyright issues or whatever. It just felt like a gift from the documentary gods that this was like happening in this final period of the school year. Yeah, and it just was clear.
Yeah, I feel like we have to talk about all of the crying scenes because I feel like when I was watching it, it just like, crumbles your heart. You're just like, oh no, it's like it's so hard to watch and there's that feeling where, I'm sure a lot of doc filmmakers have where it's like you just have to keep filming, but at what point do you feel like should I put the camera down? Is it like you're wrestling maybe ethically with like, oh no, should I comfort them? Should I, or do I just keep rolling? Yeah. How is that experience for your crew?
Yeah, for sure. It's always that question. And I think that just the fact that we were in the school for so long, and if it just like
Yeah.
swooped in for that, I mean, that's the thing, it's impossible to swoop in for just that story. Like, no one would like
Yeah.
know that it's happening. So, but like, it just came out of that long term, like, presence at the school. So, these kids, it wasn't the first time Miami is crying like in front of us when you see the scenes in the film, and there, it was just so we know that like we know her and we know her, we know them. So like, and it was in between kind of those conversations where, we whatever, quote unquote, we got the scene and always break time. I try not to talk to the kids during class time anyway. I feel like that was a line I drew because it just gets, I mean, the respect to the teacher and everything. But the break times, is really about kind of making sure everybody felt okay and just letting them know I'm just there to help them, support them. If I tried to learn their audition parts, just for to make sure like I was in it with them in between things like that. And I think, yeah, I think if it just helped that like if it was the first time anybody was crying, like I don't know if we could have done it like that, but I think it was like our culmination. And yeah, just like taking care of in between. And it's also, and then sometimes, not necessarily in these scenes, but like I would be there and I would, see a kid struggling, and I could be the person that told the teacher because there's like so many kids around. And like, I think that also I had the trust of the teachers that like if I found something that really needed attention, that I was just an extra adult in the room to help them, and I think I did some of that too throughout the year and throughout this story. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for how to build trust with the parents? Like with other filmmakers maybe that are telling a story of a child or at a school or, of course you're going to have to get permission from the parents. So, and I'm sure it changed over the course of this whole journey. Yeah, any tips for filmmakers that are looking to tell stories of kids?
Yeah, I mean, for this particular project, I was in school with the kids during COVID when like basically parents were banned and they had so little I mean, even without COVID, right? Like I think, I don't know in other places, but in Japan, like one of the issues is like schools are kind of closed, or just like this focusing on insight, so their outreach or sharing with the parents of the community is, I think, a place they can improve on. And so like I really was in constant communication with many parents, just like, hey, I saw your son do this today and he looked awesome, like I saw your daughter, this happened, and I think she's okay, but just letting you know in case like it comes up at home. And with not just, for example, anybody that is featured in the short, like many kids, because I think I thought that was like the least I could do by kind of being allowed, by the community in, and as much as I could, but also as a filmmaker, like, so that when the time comes and that child is, something happens, like first I can be like, hey, this, didn't get the part audition today and she was really upset, but we were there, I think she's gonna audition tomorrow again, like, And I'm hoping that you're okay for us to continue following her journey on this. Like that was a natural thing to say because there was previous communication. So I think just like being, kind of thinking about what can you do for the parents or the family if you're also filming with them, is also what I was thinking because it's also hard to prepare, how do you explain like your child is going to be in a documentary fully? Like you never know. I mean, look, we're nominated for the Oscars. Like I didn't tell that to them before, It's just impossible sometimes to fully get them to, but I think what you can do on a daily basis, because also a lot of these kids and families helped me and they're not in the film, and I feel but they helped me learn about what I wanted to make about the film and also my stance is like I hope like please cooperate if you think like that those hours, those moments is like a life experience, like a positive life experience for your family because I can't promise if you'll be in the film or not, like just because sometimes, people talk about permission. There's also the other side of like people like wanting to be in a film and assuming you're in if you're film with them. So like managing those expectations and being like, hey, and if you want your son to like enjoy learning more about a camera, here's our camera guy who's happy to talk to you, just like different in the moment things like while you're in the community that you can do, I think was my stance at least, yeah.
Setting the expectations that maybe you'll not make it in the final film, I think is really real. And it's something that maybe like we all forget, but I feel like that's, people maybe assume that, you might make it in the final film, but maybe not. So just having the expectation and conversation up front, I think is good. And it's a long-term game. Like you're going to have to keep communicating with them. Like you said, you can't necessarily anticipate that you might be nominated for an Oscar. So it's like the constant communication, like over time that I feel like, really builds that trust. Are there any other fun stories that you want to share from Instruments of a Beating Heart that you feel like you haven't shared yet?
Gosh, I mean, it was just, every day was just like, so dramatic and so fun, and I think like, I would say, the day of the performance, like, I feel like I was like more nervous than like, not necessarily for them, but just to not mess it up. Like we basically, it was, on the other days is basically one camera and my camera person, sound guy, the three of us. But for the performance, obviously, we had multiple cameras, but it was going to be one shot. It was. But I wanted all these shots because even at the end of the shooting, it wasn't clear that it was going to be just I am, and we had all these sub stories that I wanted to make sure we got shots of all the other kids that we could end up including in the story, and they were all around the gymnasium. 170 kids. And so, and I was very pregnant. I was like, like basically 5 weeks before giving birth. And I said, like, everybody was like, please sit down and just, I don't know, like, so it was, and I was so proud, I think like sometimes, again, like I'm glad that I'm not, the DP sometimes because if you cry, it's hard to shoot. And I feel like I was so with them and the teachers too. I think the performance was very short. We don't have the full performance in the short, but it's not that much longer, and we had to make sure we got those shots. And also not, I didn't want to, maybe like a more Western approach would have just been to like prioritize it, but it was like the entrance ceremony for new grade kids and parents, and I wanted to make sure they didn't feel like they didn't really know what was going on that much then. And so a lot of considerations, and I remember just being so happy that the performance was so amazing and we got to capture. It was like a different kind of, it's not usually what I do, kind of like a bigger multi-camera shoot. So, but it was so crucial. And yeah, and of course you take for granted once you do it. But like I remember that day, and it just because, and also as a project, right? If you can't get, for some reason, if you have some sort of trouble happens the day before and you've been shooting all year, but you're shut out or something until the very last moment, it was never a given, even though you've gotten permission for a year, like it's always up to you on a daily basis to like renew that. So yeah, and also none of the key crew getting COVID, which would have banned us from going to the school, all this stuff. I'm just glad we got the last performance.
So many obstacles.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, to your point, it's like one big moment. And like I feel like a lot of there's a lot of pressure to get it right, to know which camera angles to do, and you can't ask them to do it over again. So thinking about directing a moment like that, whether it's, a live performance or it's a big competition or whatever it is, like, especially if you've never directed something like that before, how do you communicate with your crew? And, and sometimes you might not be able to know exactly where, your student will stand, or, there's so many variables on the day of. So I'm curious, like, what do you think that you did prep wise that, set you up for success to capture it the way that you did?
I mean, for this particular instance, I mean, we even like shortlisted, which I've never really done as a doc filmmaker. We would sing the crew would sing the tune in the gym without the kids there, and like know where to be, like, after this measure, and like they move back behind her shoulder, and then, the other camera person like shooting the teacher at this moment and whatever. So it was really rehearsed, even though without the kids. And thankfully, in the Japanese school, at a ceremony like that, there was not going to be like Ema was. We knew where she was going to stand. Like those kind of changes don't happen last minute in Japan, which is I don't even know what we would have done if somehow there was that kind of a thing. So although you never like before and after, right? Like because I knew that it was a performance plus whatever happens before and however it ends after they leave the gym. That shot, like that the film ends on, they run out. I think was like a crucial because they're so nervous inside, and it really took that last shot, I feel like, to really get a glimpse of like how they really felt, even though they're running off that freedom or that sense of pride. And those kind of stuff, I just have to trust the crew, But for the performance, we just rehearsed, and I would over and over so that and to the song, like so yeah, that's what we did. Yeah, that I think really worked.
Now I'm imagining the rehearsing in the gym, moving with the cameras with no kids there.
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it's and like singing "Ode to Joy" to ourselves, or
Yes.
playing the song. Yeah, yeah.
Can you tell me about the feeling that you had when you found out that you got nominated?
Yes. And if you'd like, and if your audience would like, I have the clip of the moment. I just like burst out into tears, and it was yeah, it was surreal, and in a way, it's like, of course, it's like the honor of, I feel like every filmmaker, without knowing how the industry works, is like an easy thing to dream about. And I just didn't really think it was going to be this in this moment. I thought it was going to be when I'm like, much older and just like, I don't know, really further done kind of honed in on my craft. And so, and it's great because I think everybody can relate that like, I'm just making films for them to be seen, and then as a result, hoping to have some sort of impact in a way that only documentaries can. I'm not an education expert, and I'm not an academic, but I think like that experience through like storytelling can really have conversations, and that's just all I've wanted, especially with this education project. And I just know that this means more people will see the film, and that's what made me really happy. That's what I thought about, and it's of course I'm happy to go to the Oscars, and that'll be amazing. But I think it's just like being recognized for the work, this which has been taken a really long time, and then what it will mean, hopefully, for not just the people in my film, but as I mentioned earlier, like hopefully it'll just get education, people talking about how do we want to raise our kids, and just like pulling from different cultures in a way to ideally pick the best of everything, like the best of different systems, I think is the ideal. We can't do that, but just like, hey, sharing what Japan is doing, and again, also pointing out it's not a perfect system, but just laying that on the table, because I don't think there's anything more important than thinking about how to raise how to raise our the next generation. It'll reflect the societies we live in, and sometimes I think education can kind of be like a little bit uptight, or I know in the US it gets quite political. It's not the case in Japan. Just like I think it should just really be about like what kind of future do we want, and how do those kids thrive in that. And I was just so grateful of the opportunity that, like the nomination will bring further to those kind of conversations. Yeah, so I basically, wept is the short answer.
Love it. Is there anything else that you want to add before we jump into rapid fire questions?
No, I think this is great. I mean, I could do this all day. I could talk all day with you, and I would love to do that. Just like, where do you live?
I live in San Diego.
Yeah, I would love to just like grab
Yeah.
coffee and talk about doc making forever. It's just like, but like, no, for this purpose, like,
Forever and
I'm
ever.
good.
Yes. Okay, amazing. Okay, we're gonna jump to our rapid fire questions. So just try and answer what first comes to mind. Tokyo or New York?
Ah, that's so hard.
And all right, I hit you with a hard one first, sorry.
New York for your 20s, but otherwise Tokyo.
Okay, fair. Who's a filmmaker or creative that you look up to?
Frederick Wiseman.
Do you prefer editing during the day or the night? Nice. I feel like there's so many like night editors, so it's refreshing to hear that you like editing during the day.
Yeah, yeah.
Favorite editing shortcut?
Just the edit tool, like what is it? It just makes a cut.
Splice.
Splice, yes. Crucial.
What's one crucial, very crucial. What's one documentary that has changed the way you think about the world?
Act of killing.
What is a documentary or movie you could watch over and over and not get tired of?
I don't watch docs over and over. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Anything. It could be anything then.
I mean, this is what I watch often. Is this is not rapid fire at all, but quick as possible. My favorite hero, childhood hero, which also is like I think a big part of who I am, is baseball player Ichiro Suzuki, who just got inducted into the Hall of Fame. First Japanese alpha, like a position player to make it in the majors. And he has there's like videos of him talking. And like this is like my philosophy that I can watch over and over. It's more like life philosophy, I feel like, than doc making, but this is what I watch over and over or listen to over and over. Yeah. It's like
Wow. Okay, send me the link. I want to listen to it too. Okay. How do you unwind after a long day of filming or editing?
Like hang out with my son. I don't know if that's unwinding, but it's like a different mental space. And then after he goes to bed, I love like a glass of orange wine and watching something dumb on, not dumb, but like something not stimulating on like Netflix or YouTube or something. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, and who else should I have on this podcast?
Good question. They have to speak English, right? They have to be able to speak English.
Well, I guess so, but not necessarily. We could figure something out. I don't want to say they have to speak English.
I mean, you know what? I will. One of my closest friends, closest collaborators, especially for U.S. work, is a doc DP called Michael Cromit. I filmed my feature KOSHIEN Field of Dreams with him. I'm shooting a new project with him. He's like, I feel like we're twins, except his focus is like how best to capture docs from his point. Michael Cromit, I would say. Yeah. I went to school with.
Love it. Amazing. Well, thank you, Emma, so much for our conversation today. I really enjoyed it. That's a wrap on today's episode. So thank you so much for listening and or watching. If you liked this episode, screenshot it, tag us, tell us what you liked about it, and we hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you.